in general mean to that. So super excited to share some perspectives on that. I'll use some slides to guide us along the way and tell a story, but really what I want to hone in on as the main theme for us today is, as you're out there working in your data teams and you're trying to do more, one of the greatest ways to do more has less to do about the technology and more to do about how you can align it to the organization's goals and the value that the solution will bring. And so I thought I would take you through quickly who I am. I'll explain what Databricks is if you haven't been part of the series or don't know the origins of Databricks, which root right there at Berkeley in the same buildings and halls that you all walk. And then we'll dig into the meat of this, which is really why the data team should focus on value, but also how they should. And so I've got some great experiences and some things to share with everyone. We'll talk specifically about Databricks and my comments about it and what Databricks does to deliver value for our customers really apply to the whole technology stack in general, regardless of Databricks. Of course, there are unique things we do that helps deliver a little more value than other ways to do it. And then lastly, I just thought it'd be interesting for us to talk about some use cases. These are real use cases I'll be sharing with you from real customers. I'll also share their names. Some of the details will be high level just because we don't want to give away everybody's secrets. But with that, I thought we'd get started. So the who I am part, Drew gave me a wonderful introduction. I'm grateful for that. But one of the things I do want to warn you all here, understanding in the School of Information and the focus on data and data science, you're talking to a salesperson. And I say that with with excitement, because I wish I was as technical as a lot of the great architects and data scientists in our organization and those that I meet in our customers. But the skills and the gifts I think that I've been given and developed over the years really are in the idea of helping to connect the dots. And so I spent and started the first 20 years of my career in sales and sales leadership. So depending on how you think of salespeople, when you saw that word and you heard it, you might have thought of something like this, which is one of the screenshots from the movie Cadillac Man with Robin Williams. Most people think there's a perception when you hear the word sales, and that salespeople are either kind of a little slippery, a little shifty. They're out there just for themselves. But when I started my career about 30 years ago, and I started it at IBM, I learned very quickly that the reality of the salespeople that I was working with was very different than the perception that I had. The person to my left in the office graduated from Harvard. Person to my right, she graduated from Brown. And these were brilliant people, super smart, and they were actually helping businesses solve real problems. And I think it was that initial view that I had of these people and the job that got me so excited about doing that. Now, when I talk to technical audiences, this is actually often a much better way to frame the who am I conversation, because technical people probably don't feel all that warm and fuzzy when they talk with salespeople. They just want the answer. They don't want to be convinced of something. They don't want to be, kind of worked, if you will, which can feel that way sometimes. So if you think about me in this lens, I'm from the evil empire. I'm from the sales side of the house. I was a rep for 9 years. I got even more evil when I became a sales leader and then ran global sales for 3 companies. The vast majority of my time I spent in startups. And one of the things that happened in those startups that was so interesting for me was that I learned very quickly that when you bring something new to the market and you're not doing it in an existing category, there are some real challenges with getting people to understand what it is, why they need it, and what it will do for them. And so I developed this skill around translating technology to value very early on with a number of the startups. In the last 7 years, I had the great joy of being able to work with Splunk. My sense is you all know what Splunk is. It's a machine data platform that allows all of that data that's kind of exhaust on the floor of applications and servers and routers, do some interesting things with it. And I was part of that organization from 200 million to 2 billion, ran a global organization, about 120 people. But that's me, the evil empire. If I really think about who I am, I actually have a passion for disruptive technology. One of the most exciting parts of bringing something new to a business, bringing something new to whether that's a sysadmin, a developer, a data scientist, or even an executive is educating them on the value proposition of what it is that we do. And so this graphic, this cartoon kind of tells a really good story because this is what it's like for salespeople who sell disruptive technology. The general in the battlefield has no time to talk to the salesman with the Gatling gun because he's got a war to fight with knives and spears. So any event, it was fun to have that time in my career and really work with those technologies. I've been part of many organizations, as I mentioned, all the way back to BBM Planet in the early to mid 90s, which was right when the internet was becoming commercialized. Did a number of startups and had some great success of getting businesses launched from zero in revenue to 20, 50, 100 or more $1 million in revenue. And then through an acquisition. So I've been acquired by GTE, Cisco, Oracle, VMware, SAS, and then of course had a couple of IPOs in there as well. So I've seen a lot of different things. But the one thing that's really interesting about all of these technologies I've been part of is they've all been about leveraging data and how you can make it more efficient or effective, whether that be for security purposes, like the world of Bit9 and Splunk was very familiar with, or for customer support and service like Webline was, or Endeca, which was very broadly applicable. So a lot of fun in there. So that's just a quick bit about me, but let's talk about Databricks. When you think about it, the world of analytics is not new. In fact, the use of data in reporting and business intelligence and data warehousing, these things have been around for a long time. But I believe what's happening today and what the real revolution is about how the data is being used. And part of it is the availability of the data. There's a heck of a lot more of it. The speed with which that data is changing, that velocity, and then also just the number of users who have the ability to consume it and act on it. And that's all made possible through cloud, through the elastic compute that's available, all the processing speeds. So one of the things that I love about this quote is how people use data, I think is really changing. And I think for many, this was appropriate in the past, where the data would support the theory that they had rather than give them the theory that they just discovered, that illumination or that insight. So Databricks is really all about bringing the data analytics platform together and unifying that platform so that data engineers, data scientists, business analysts across the board can accelerate the innovation that they bring to their organizations. We were started out of the AMP lab in Berkeley right there. So I think I could spare you all the fun story about the Netflix competition, but there's a good one there if you want to Google that story. But today we're a global company with operations all over, 5,000 plus customers, 450 partners, about 1,500 or more employees. And our roots are very, very deep in the open source community. So we've not only created, but also continue to contribute significantly to Apache Spark, Delta Lake, MLflow, and Redash, all open source projects. But at the end of the day, all this great data, all this open source, and all this elastic cloud compute, these endless resources that we have, most organizations are actually failing. And when I say failing, they're failing to get the value they anticipated out of these solutions because of a few limitations. One is the data, because it's kind of messy and some of it's structured and some of it's not. Some of it is, comes in batches and some of it streams. The technology that has to get pieced together. If you look at this slide, it's meant to be a little confusing on purpose, but the idea that depending upon the types of users that you have who might want to do highly structured analytics and BI sorts of queries or SQL queries versus those who really want to do data science, you have to find one way to do this or have to make accommodations for them all. So the challenges really boil down to kind of 4 areas that Databricks addresses. So the first is that data is really messy and it's siloed and slow. And what we really mean by that is it's messy because much of the data today is not structured. 10, 20 years ago, everyone got their data out of a data warehouse. That data warehouse had a really rigid schema to it, and it was stored in columns and rows. And as a result of that, you could ask it very specific questions. But when you wanted to ask it a question, it wasn't programmed to answer, it couldn't answer it. So you had to change the schema, and it became really challenging and costly and complex. The data is also siloed because it resides in various parts of the organization, both inside different departments, but then outside the company, because so many organizations are leveraging SaaS solutions and other cloud repositories to store it. So then moving around that data becomes really slow and challenging as well. Machine learning, as I think all you know, is pretty hard to do. Developing the right algorithms and testing them and doing all that is one thing. Getting it to production is a whole nother thing. I don't have the article handy, but I read something recently that said 70% of machine learning models never make it to production, which is an astounding stat. It speaks to some other bigger challenges. What is it about that? Well, you've got different groups who work within this data team world. Data engineers and data scientists. The engineers might sit in IT. The data science teams might sit out in the business. There's some natural silos and barriers there that hold them back, and it can be really challenging. The third factor is, that just business intelligence in general, because of the size of data and because of the need for the hardware to process that data and to make it available and to have queries that respond quickly, you generally have to aggregate or sample the data. So when you do business intelligence and you're trying to provide those reports, you're generally limited not only to the amount of data, the types of, the rows of data, if you will, but also to the various columns and the various facets of the data. So there's some limitations there that business intelligence has. And then if you think about doing all of this at scale, and when I say at scale, what I really mean by that is it's one thing to have a sandbox where one or two data scientists are able to mess around with some data and some models and see what's possible. It's another thing to weave that into all of your operational processes for software development and release, whether that be through web apps that are internal or customer facing. And as a result of that, if you need to do that, you've got to be really good at security. But unfortunately, with the various ways that organizations use applications, whether they be SaaS or in-house developed, there's a fragmented strategy there. There's no single security framework. They're also oftentimes, unreliable in terms of the data and whether it shows up or not. And then you have different groups governing that data. So all of these things really bring us to a place where there's a powerful solution. And that powerful solution is to unify all of those silos, all of those data sources, and all of that spaghetti diagram that you saw on that prior slide. And that's what we do at Databricks. And so the first part where it all starts is where you store your data. So we build something called a data lake. Certainly you've heard of these, but the idea that you can have one location for all of your data, whether it be unstructured data, like documents, streaming media files, semi-structured information. So you might have the file and a couple pieces of metadata, or whether you have highly structured information that comes out of various systems, be that your Salesforce.com, your SAP sort of things. So we have one place that you do that. Now, what makes Databricks unique in that way is that we actually allow you to keep your data exactly wherever it resides. So if you're in an Amazon customer, that data sits in an S3 bucket. If it's in Azure, it sits in blob storage. And so the idea that you can keep your data wherever you have it, but then apply this structured transactional layer that Delta Lake brings. And what that really does is it adds ACID transactions and effectively cleans up the data so that when you go to process it, it's super, super fast. One of the things you recall from the first slide and the title really is how we can accelerate innovation and data science success through value. And it's about speed and performance. That's where the Delta engine comes in, because that's our high performance query engine. And then lastly, you have multiple users to serve with this data. And this is where the traditional data warehouses and data science teams, who today are generally bifurcated, can all come together and leverage the same engine, but leverage it in the way that they want, whether that's using, something like Redash to get after data for traditional queries, reports, and dashboards, or to do more with machine learning and explore data science through our workspace. Of course, then managing all of your models through, like you might software development and code through the learning lifecycle. So it's really one platform for every use case. But that's enough about Databricks. Let's talk about really the why. If you follow Simon Sinek at all, right, he's always talking about start with the why. Well, I did it third here because I wanted to give a little background. But the why focus on value in terms of the data teams, I think is primarily because the tremendous opportunity that exists. There's an MIT survey that was done and published in Forbes recently, where 83% of CEOs are actually saying that AI is a strategic priority for the organization. Now, some might think that, CEOs, what do they know about AI? Well, they know it's incredibly transformative to their business, and it could be a huge strategic differentiator, both financially and competitively, if they can harness it, if they can leverage that. And Gartner, of course, backs that up with their reference to the fact that the business value to be created by AI will reach $3.9 trillion in 2022. And this is a 2019 study, so it was a very short window rather than talking about 10 years out. They were talking about 3 years out. And this is real. So a tremendous opportunity. I think the other part of why focus on value in data science is because that all of you, the data teams now, might have been considered the math geeks of the past, where no one wanted to talk to you at the party. The reality is today that data science and data scientists in particular are now the cool cats. They're the ones everybody wants to talk to, because whether you're a business person or a technologist, you realize that this is the future of how organizations will achieve new levels of competitiveness, profitability, efficiency, customer personalization, all sorts of things. So it's nice to be with you cool cats today. But here's reality. And I've seen this in my time at Databricks, and I can tell you that when the data science team generally goes to the business, and it's a generalization, they talk about the amazing things they're going to do with the technology and the algorithms that they're developing, and they always have a hard time articulating the return on investment, why it's important to the business, why it's strategic and different. They really spend too much time in the science. And so there's a great opportunity here to go from being the deer in the headlights to being the hero in the organization. And if you don't believe me and my kind of funny graphics, believe this. There was a recent Harvard Business Review article, it's just published last year, and the title was a bit catchy, so of course I read it. But they went through and kind of pulled apart a bunch of data science projects. And they referenced the study that called that 8 in 10 data and AI projects fail. And the thing that was most interesting to me was that it wasn't about the technical work. My sense is you all are pretty competitive, and you probably believe that your work in data science might be better than someone else's. So you would think that the work itself would actually have something to do with the success or failure of a project. And the reality, at least according to this study, is that success was all about aligning with the business to understand what their needs and challenges were. It was building trust with the people who made decisions about what would we be doing with our customers, and what would we be doing with our supply chain or with our drug discovery. And most importantly, the third element was about being able to explain data science and the results of the work in very simple and powerful ways. And so that was success, but they noted the opposite for failure, right? The idea that data teams who didn't connect with executives, who didn't connect with the appropriate lead in the business, but just went off and worked on a bunch of side projects and things that they thought were interesting, they failed. And those who also expressed their success in the term of technology or technical terms, like we used to process this data in 20 hours and now it can be processed in 2, they failed to really express what that time difference meant to the organization. So the why to focus on it is it's a tremendous opportunity to change and transform businesses. But if you don't factor in the business, you're really missing a great opportunity. So I also get to speak to many executives along the way, and one of my fellow business school alums I had the chance to speak with, his name's Dan Brennan at Boston Scientific, a huge medical device company. And I asked them very simply, I said, how do you prioritize investments? I have to believe, you're asked by all of your various teams and across the whole business to spend. People make their wish lists up, and then they all come to you with their hands out looking for funding. And his answer it came right off the tip of his tongue. He didn't even have to think about it. The first part of it was talking about the 5 key pillars that they have at an organizational perspective in terms of their strategy. Everything they do has to align to those 5 things. And if it doesn't, they toss it out. Doesn't matter whether it's investing in technology, renovating an office, or even building a new manufacturing plant. It all has to align to those pillars. And then the funny part was he just said, after that, the best NPV wins. And for those of you who don't have the finance background, NPV refers to the net present value. And it's effectively what the current value of a future cash stream or benefit stream looks like, which is that cash stream, assuming would be an investment that's made and a return that's gained. So it really reinforces a lot of the key reasons why. So I've got for you 3 steps that I see data teams that succeed use every time, and the ones that fail not use these at all. So the first one, said it a few times, and Dan had a really good piece of in his quote there, but make sure that you understand your corporation's objectives or your organization's objectives, whether you're a for-profit enterprise, in the education business, or even working in a government agency. It doesn't matter. Every organization has a set of priorities that are set by the top leaders in the company. Maybe that's a board of directors, maybe that's the C-suite, and then they typically communicate that with the rest of the organization. So if you're working on something, you got to make sure you can connect it there. The reason is that everything flows from that. The attention of the executives, the funding that they need, and the prioritization of the projects. So you may have a great idea for a great project, but if it doesn't align, they're going to say, yeah, that's really great. Let's do that in 6 months because we have these other things that are more important. So I think it's really important, first off, whenever you're working on a project, align it to the investment, align your project investment to the strategic priorities. The second piece is make sure that you analyze and measure business impact. Now, this may sound obvious. The reality is I've seen too many data teams actually spend so much time explaining how great the technical value is, meaning, how much easier something is, how much faster something is, how much more data we can process. And those are all great capabilities. And our platform gives you great capabilities, but our platform doesn't give you value until you use the capability. So if you're going to process data faster, what does that do for the organization? Does that mean that we can run more personalization campaigns or have a better user experience because we're leveraging near real-time data to serve our customers? Does it mean that I'm going to have a greater impact on predictive maintenance of my manufacturing line? Whatever that is, you've got to really translate the capability you get from the technology to something that's measurable, that means something to the business. And those things typically are revenue increase, cost reductions, risk reductions, and then a more softer benefit, which is really productivity gains, so that maybe your people become more effective, they can do more work. And that's another great way to reflect that. So make sure you don't skip this step. And if you're looking at a slide or a document you've produced and it's talking about the speed with which you used to do something versus now, go that one step further. And then lastly, and again, I see a lot of organizations just not spending the time on this. It's make sure you tell your story. And the story, like any story, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has characters in that story who go through challenges and then overcome those challenges to reach a great outcome. And I can't tell you how often people forget this part of the story. I'm going to share with you a couple of examples. But if you follow this, you'll make sure that the leaders in your organization understand the why they need to do it now, why they should use the solution that you're recommending. And so your project will be have significantly increased odds of succeeding because you'll have executive support, funding, and priority. So I'm going to show you a business case. This is actually a real business case. I've taken the customer's name out to protect them, their innocence. But I want you to imagine for a moment you're an executive and your data team has come to you and you know that they've been using Databricks and you know that they want to do more. And you're a busy person, so you're receiving this. So, and I apologize for the small bit of the slide. You don't have to really read the slide per se. I've given you a little commentary on the top, but the first slide in the presentation says our usage of Databricks is going up. As a if I'm an executive, my first inkling is, uh-oh, that means I'm spending more money. Why is it going up? So no one answered that question. The second slide, it says, and we're forecasting even more growth. So now I'm getting really scared. Does that mean that my spend is going to double, triple, quadruple? I have no idea. And I honestly don't even know what we're doing with the technology. The third slide was, and by the way, the Databricks purchasing process is easy. You can just go to the Azure Databricks portal and click and buy. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not worried about buying. I'm still worried right now that everything's growing. They have options. There are package options. There's 3 different options that they've proposed to us, and we can look at those. And then lastly, we'll need training. And there were a couple of other slides in the presentation. I took them out just to try to fit them all on this one. But the fact of the matter is this business case had absolutely no business context. There was no value quantified. So if you're telling me our usage is growing, I'm thinking to the way I used to think about my daughter when she had her cell phone and we used to have a limited usage plan. Like if you're using a lot more data on the cell phone and you blow over it, now I have to pay more money, I'm going to tell her to stop using it, right? So I think, you got to make sure that you quantify the value that the usage is bringing. And this just doesn't tell a story. You make it really easy for me as an executive to say no to this particular proposal, or to say, I know that you're passionate about it. That's great. Maybe we'll do that next fiscal year. Maybe we'll do that in 2 quarters. Now, to contrast this, let's take a look at another one. The first one was a summary of the strategic priorities of the organization. If I'm the executive, you have my attention. You know how I'm getting measured. You even put a quote on there from the CEO who's talking about data and AI in the market, because as we saw previously, 83% of them say it's a strategic priority. You've listed out some of the use cases that you've identified that can have a real meaningful impact on those strategic priorities. So you've identified something connected to those priorities. Again, you have my attention. You've also identified that we have some challenges today, whether that be that we're lacking some AI or machine learning lifecycle management problems, maybe takes too long to innovate, maybe there's lack of collaboration, maybe the systems we have in place, if we're using Hadoop, for example, is too expensive. The point is, you've taken me down the road here. It's a nice story. We've got some really important priorities I know you care about, and we've identified ways we can help, but we've got some barriers in the way. Okay, well, what should we do next? Here's the recommended solution, Databricks, and then you're going to explain briefly how you can overcome those challenges. And then the proof that it'll deliver, because we ran a proof of concept. We actually tested this so that we could come to you and give you the confidence that we know it's going to work. And Databricks was 6.3 times better, and it was performed better than AWS and their EMR service. But more importantly, the use cases that we have identified are going to deliver $500+ million in value for the organization. One of the things that I've heard said before, and I completely believe it, and you all should feel this way, is there is not a single role in any organization where one individual can have $100 million impact on a business, but there is for a data scientist. So you can develop that algorithm, you can get that one into production that actually moves the needle in a big, big way for your company, your organization. So after summarizing the value, there's the investment options, and then how we're going to be successful. So when I look at this one, number one, it's a complete story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it makes it really, really easy for executives to say yes. And believe me, I think most executives want to say yes. But when they see an incomplete story or someone who went halfway and really didn't connect all the dots, number one, they don't have time to connect the dots for you. But number two, they realize that the person hasn't put enough thought into the particular project, and therefore it doesn't is not worthy of their attention and funding. So that's my view on a couple of examples there. So let's talk more specifically about the actual technology and the value it delivers. Now, this is the slide I shared with you before in terms of what Databricks is, and the data lake for all your data. We structure it and then give you this really fast engine to query it, and then we can serve all sorts of use cases, be they SQL and BI based or data science based as well, all on a single platform. But like I said, the platform doesn't really do anything. It doesn't give me value directly. It's the capabilities that it gives me, and then those capabilities convert to value when I use them. So Databricks, we found this pattern early on in my team's work with customers, and we've worked with over 1,000 different customers at this point. They get value in 3 ways. The first value component is about the infrastructure, and they actually save money on infrastructure because the platform performs much faster. And that kind of doesn't necessarily make sense until you factor in cloud computing. So Databricks runs in the cloud, which means if you're an AWS customer, every time you're running Databricks, you're also running EC2 compute. So if our platform could perform faster than an alternative solution, the compute which underlies both solutions is going to be less. So the total cost of ownership with our solution versus an alternative is typically 30 to 50% less because we're so much faster. So infrastructure costs are saved. The second benefit is around the productivity of the data teams themselves. I hear from a lot of data scientists, they spend an awful lot of time wrangling data. And that means that it's either not super clean, so they have to spend some time fixing it. They have to get it into the right places and such so they can use it. Maybe they need to collaborate amongst other data scientists, and all the work that one does has to be reproduced by another. So Databricks makes that super simple with our notebooks that are collaborative, where literally they can collaborate just like you can on a Google Doc. You can collaborate on these notebooks so that people can borrow code, copy code, and innovate together. So those 2 benefits, 2 of the 3 are associated with just the data platform itself. Now, many organizations who are quantifying value do spend their time in this area focusing on these 2, and these are very important. But what I'll tell you is the biggest benefit that you'll get from using this platform is really what comes from the use of it in terms of the use case. So because our platform is significantly faster, you can imagine now a data scientist who used to run a job that took 20 hours to run and can do it in 2 hours. You can iterate now on a model in your machine learning lifecycle development. You can iterate on that model instead of once a day, maybe 4, 5, 6 times in a day. You'll finish that project much, much faster. You'll get that out into production much more quickly. And so what the use case actually is, we want to be able to demonstrate the accelerated deployment of that use case. And that's where the real big money comes from. So this very simple framework, and I think really applies to all data team projects. And if you can focus on this, you're giving the executive a very complete view of value. Some executives are going to be mainly focused on driving down costs. So they see the infrastructure cost and then they see these other 2 benefits and go, great. Some will be very interested in productivity because maybe we can't hire any more folks on the data team as much as we want to. We can't. They're expensive. They're hard to find. Maybe we did a lot of investing previously. And lastly, if they want to be a hero to the stakeholders across the business and help the sales team or marketing team or manufacturing or finance or R&D, they're going to want to be able to articulate that we helped you bring that really cool use case to market much faster. So really interesting story. Now, at Databricks, we had a great opportunity where Forrester went out and talked to our customers. And then they published a study they called the total economic impact of our platform. So we had a theory about how customers got value based on our interactions with them. And then they just went out and talked to customers. And they heard some really amazing things about how fast the platform was, and how even though their Databricks usage and everything has grown, that their cloud costs have stayed the same. Again, kind of focusing on the cost reductions. But what they found across these customers, and these were across several industries, on average, they experienced a 47% reduction in infrastructure costs. That's pretty significant. A 25% boost to data science productivity. So That's really amazing. Data scientists are expensive. They're, we want to get the most out of them. And if they're wasting time on tasks that are not worthy of them, we're kind of wasting our investment. So this helps us get much more out of that team. And that the work that the data science team did on average was driving a minimum of 5% increase to the top line of the company, which is really, really exciting. And so we were super happy to have that. So that's a bit about how the technology delivers value. And again, if there are questions anywhere along the way, drop them in the Q&A, drop them in the chat. We'll get to them here at the end. But lastly, I thought it would be pretty cool to just share some use cases that I think are particularly interesting. And they're great examples of how great data team and data science work can be applied to a business and drive significant outcomes. So the first three I'll share with you are these, and then I've got a couple of more right behind it. But I'm sure everyone knows Comcast. I've been a customer on and off of Comcast over the years, and I can say that, like a typical cable company, because they are a legacy media company, they struggled with customer service and customer experience, and they weren't really great at it, for a number of years. But they've successfully adopted a new data and machine learning strategy. They want to create new experiences for viewers, and they're really, really trying to focus in on improving satisfaction and retention. Obviously, they're in a subscription business. They want you to come back. They want to keep selling you new services. So if you know Comcast on the cable side, you know how awesome it is to have the voice activated remote that you can simply speak to, whether you want a particular show or just want to look at comedies on demand. If you want to look up your favorite sports team or the news, you can just speak to your remote and it instantly does it. Now, the thing that's behind the scenes and how Databricks helps them is that your voice is translated using NLP into a query. That query is fired against a massive data set from all of the data input and experiences that they have from all of their customers. And it brings it back in almost real time. It feels like you're almost having that conversation real time. So Databricks is providing the platform that makes that super quick for them to run that algorithm. They tried to do this with another platform. And what they realized, number one, they could not achieve it. But what they had deployed, Databricks did it for 10% of the infrastructure cost. So saving them millions and millions of dollars. It was super, super impactful from a cost savings perspective, but it also has driven up their retention rates significantly. So that's just kind of a neat new feature, a product feature that Comcast developed and are delivering now because of Databricks. For those of you who know Sam's Club, they're a membership club. They're owned by Walmart. And if you know this industry, the retail industry in particular, margins are razor, razor thin. And of course, Sam's Club and Walmart really focused on always having really low prices. So you got to keep your costs down. And so when you do this, think about the needs for inventory, and in particular with fresh food. A number of these Sam's Clubs have bakeries and produce and other sorts of items. What's interesting about this one use case that they have that I wanted to share is that if you think about the old world of how the bakery manager ordered, bagels and bread and all the pastries that they want to get delivered in, they would generally take a look at last week's order volume, and they would probably add a little bit to it. Maybe they would look at orders from a year ago, and they'd add a little bit, thinking, okay, the community's bigger, where our sales are up, so maybe we should add more. But the one thing the bakery manager had to be really, really certain of is they didn't want you to show up on a Saturday morning, go to get your fresh bagels to bring home to your family, and the shelf be empty. So they would always add 10 or 20% to the order, which led to a huge amount on Monday of product that would get dumped, which not only is a horrible thing when we have hungry people in the world to be throwing food away, but more importantly, not more importantly, but also importantly, it was costing them a significant amount of money, close to $1 billion in food waste that they had across all of their particular lines. So with Databricks, what they did is they deployed a predictive algorithm that will actually take in all sorts of things, from historical sales to the day of the month that it may be, the time, are we near Thanksgiving? Is it the middle of April where there's not a lot going on? These things all get factored in, weather and other sorts of things. And as a result of that, they improved the accuracy of the ordering so much they've saved almost $100 million. Really, really powerful. Data scientists came up with that algorithm, and it's helping them save about $100 million. Regeneron, you might have heard a lot of in recent times because they have one of the candidate treatments for COVID. And one of the things, though, that they started using Databricks to do was to research, using massive amounts of data, this petabytes of data, of genomic data, clinical data from actual, patients and medical claims and conditions, all those sorts of things. And they're trying to find, the intersections that are interesting from a science perspective, so they can develop new candidate drugs. And if you know much about the R&D process for the pharmaceutical industry, you know that the average drug takes about 12 years to go from idea through getting to market, through all the phases that they have to go through, including clinical trials. But the research and development piece of that is a significant part of it. And with Databricks, they were able to significantly shrink that on one particular drug. They actually have a candidate in right now for liver cancer that they discovered using Databricks, which, if you think about this, like the ability to get that drug developed more quickly has many business benefits: reduced cost of getting them to market, increased risk, increased likelihood of success, that they'll succeed all the way through the trials, because it's a data-driven approach to that R&D. But more importantly, the ability to get these liver cancer patients treatment much faster and more effectively. So it really served a number of purposes. So super exciting there. And then lastly, just a couple more, and then we'll open it up to questions. But FINRA, they are protecting the U.S. security markets. They're trying to protect them from fraud. And so they are monitoring literally billions of events per day and trades. And they were struggling with the workflow and all the disjointed systems, and they effectively put us in there. So they're monitoring, trading to make sure there are no illegal patterns going on and there's no fraud happening in there. So billions of events a day, really, really interesting. Riot Games, if you are a gamer, which obviously since COVID has kicked off, I think our gaming customers on average are up probably 6 or more times. The business has been great. People are doing a lot more gaming. But if you're like Riot and you're player focused, you're trying to make that experience so wonderful. So they use Databricks to not only optimize the experience and do personalization, so your in-app purchases are recommended to you and other sorts of things. But more importantly, they were actually using it to improve performance, so they could identify or predict, those performance issues. And they were actually also able to curb in-game abusive behavior. Believe it or not, there are people playing the game and would start to abuse one another. And of course, if you're a gamer and you're playing and somebody joins the game and starts, being abusive to you, you probably don't want to come back and play Riot Games. So that's really helping them to drive engagement and keeping their community really happy. And then lastly, H&M, a retailer, they've generally been an innovator in fashion and retail. Data is at the core of everything they do, and they open up stores all the time. And they needed to really improve their ability to supply chain forecast and really do very similar to what Sam's Club was doing with food, but make sure that they don't end up with an empty shelf when the customer comes to buy something, or worse, not worse, but also equally bad, the excess inventory, which they then have to sell at a discount, or even worse, sell to a liquidator. So they use Databricks to really understand the patterns, to predict their supply chain needs, and at the end, they're doing all this by reducing their costs by 70%. So super interesting stuff there. Now, if you guys want to get started with Databricks and do some of this yourself, you can. If you go to databricks.com, there's certainly a ability to download a number of content and best practices. We have done some things called solution accelerators. So if you want to do demand forecasting, just like H&M and just like Sam's Club did, our team of experts has put together kind of a blog on that use case and the best practices for deploying it. But we've also provided you the notebook, the actual code that you would need to go do this yourself. So you can get all that for free. And then of course, spin up an instance of Databricks while you're at it and have some fun there. So to sum up, I just want to, remind you that just like the elephant in the middle of the room, value is always present. It's just up to you whether you address it or not. And if you think about the executive persona and what you need to do to show them and convince them to say yes, they don't understand the technology. So speak to them in their language. Speak to them about how it helps them with the strategic priorities. Speak to them about the measurable business impact that your solution is going to bring, and do that by becoming a really great storyteller. So with that, I'll pause, Drew, and see if we have any questions. I've also added my contact information there. If anyone has questions afterwards, they're interested and want to follow up, I'm more than happy to talk with anybody who's interested.
Thank you so much, Doug. Yeah, so we do want to spend our last few minutes addressing any questions that people have. So if you do have a question, please, you can either post it in the Q&A panel, or you can even raise your hand and we can enable your mic so that you can ask the question directly. So Doug, there is one question in the Q&A panel already, and it has to do with the 5 key pillars that you mentioned that were used by Boston Scientific. So Mark Krause is asking, what they are, and could you discuss what those 5 key pillars used by Boston Scientific are?
Well, what I can do, if you're okay, I'll just show you how we figured this out. Any publicly traded company has an annual report. And in that annual report, they often have a chairman's letter at the beginning, which is the setup. Usually talks about how the last year was, what they did really well, where they're struggling, but it also talks about the year ahead. So if I just believe Boston Scientific is a public company, we can go to effectively try to see what we can get from their investor section. So there we go to the investor section. I don't recall the specifics. Again, he was using it as more of a generalized sort of thing. But if you go in here, you can get, for example, here, there's a presentation from the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. Generally, what you'll see in these documents is after they get through all the legal disclaimers, they often talk about, what to expect. They talk about their business. And then oftentimes, I'm just going to scale really quickly. I'm sorry for the fast movement of the screen here, but usually they talk about, no, they're not doing it here. But I guess the point is, I don't know the answer to what Boston Scientific's key strategies were, but I can tell you that generally in an annual report or an investor presentation, they will go through that and articulate that quite clearly. Typically that might be things about opening new markets, becoming more efficient, international expansion, customer retention. They'll talk about the high level strategies and then a little bit more detail in the document itself.
Thanks, Doug. I actually just a quick, they don't call them pillars anymore, but they do have core values. Maybe that's what they're referring to. Maybe they added one. There's 6 of them: caring, meaningful innovation, high performance, global collaboration, diversity, and winning spirit. So it might be, and then I read something else about 4 pillars, which was, something a little bit different too. So.
Yeah, I think what you'll find, every company does it a little differently. I'll show you here again. One company I was just working with, we can go to Intuit. They're obviously should be well known for their products, software products. But when you go to the company and look at their investor relations section, there's an annual report or even Investor Day. We'll just go to Investor Day. If I can get the actual document. This is the beauty of the internet. When I was doing this stuff 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it was a lot tougher. But when you look at what they do, hold on. They will show you their strategy. Here we go. So they call it their game plan to deliver for customers. And they run through their mission, values, their goals, their true north goals, their strategy, and their big bets. So, the mission is always something big, save the world. It's why we're there. Our values are basically how we're going to act, what we believe is really important, customers and courage and integrity. Our goals are here as well. But when you get to things like their big bets, these are they're trying to revolutionize speed to benefit. So they're trying to help their customers get benefit from their solutions more quickly. That's a great opportunity for data and AI. They're trying to connect people to the experts. So they're actually trying to bring a human connection now to their solutions, and then unlock a number of smart money decisions. So the reality is that these sorts of things, all of these, you can see even here, they have an AI-driven expert platform. So my point is, if you're working in your company and you don't know what the strategic priorities are, ask your boss, ask one of the executives. Chances are they've written them down, and if they presented them into your company meeting, an all hands meeting, get them and really understand what they're all about, because you can plug into those to really get shine the light on why your project is urgent, why it needs funding, and why an executive should support you.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's know your audience and try to align your own goals with theirs is really important. Shang Yun asks, could you talk a bit more on how the data scientist could contribute in a product management team, and how kind of skills are critical for data scientists to make changes in the product team?
Well, the thing I mentioned about Comcast in particular, the voice remote, that's a product. They call that the voice, it's the voice remote. That's a very creative name, but it's a product, and it's a data product that was only made possible because of data science, only made possible because of the NLP algorithms they've been able to develop and apply against these massive data sets. So the first part of, I think, the role that data science can play in product management is actually sourcing new product ideas that are data-based products, not database products, but data-based. And so, the idea of that, I think many organizations who have traditionally might be in whole nother business are now seeing the opportunity to monetize data. If you can make data available in a certain way to a customer, maybe that's through a recommendation, maybe that's through a best practice, maybe it's through an intelligent notification, you might have the ability to create a whole new service line for your company. So that's kind of the first thing. And the second thing, I think, would be to improve existing products, again, through a data-focused approach. So we're seeing lots and lots of companies who are traditionally in other businesses creating new businesses, new revenue streams with data products. So I think that would be, that's the way I would probably think about it as a data scientist.
Excellent. Thanks, Doug. Anybody else have questions for Doug? You can either raise your hand and we'll put your mic on, or you can type it into the Q&A panel. All right, an anonymous attendee asks, can you describe how Databricks conveys to potential customers the benefits of the Databricks platform over open source solutions like Apache Spark that their data scientists might already be using for free?
Mm-hmm. For sure. One of the things that is great about, in particular, Apache Spark, number one, our co-founders were the creators of it. They still contribute about 70% of the code to the open source project. I think I mentioned early on that open source is in our blood, and it all started back at Berkeley. So it's really, really exciting. I think when you look at open source Spark and what our experience has been in helping customers make that transition from, they got their own version of Spark, they're running it in the cloud, versus the Databricks platform, is there's more to data science than Spark. It's not just about that. But at its really simple level, we've built a platform and an engine that'll make Spark run incredibly fast. So that's the first part. And if you're running it in the cloud, you have to pay for that compute portion, the EC2 or the Azure compute portion underneath that. So again, if you can do it 20% faster with Databricks, you're saving money on the cloud compute portion. So that's the first part, is that the infrastructure cost to run the very same workloads and process the same amount of data will be cheaper on Databricks. The second part of that is that speed will actually drive your innovation and time to market significantly faster. And then the third part of that is back to the model I used around productivity. There are so many other things that we bring as part of Databricks. There's Delta, so that we prepare the data and get the data, kind of clean and ready to go, and so it's highly performant. There's the ML flow, the ability to manage all the machine learning models that you're building. So there's a bunch of things that come with the platform that make it much more complete, which will drive the productivity of your people who are working with the data engineers, your data scientists. And as a result of that, they're able to deliver more projects, deliver them faster. And that kind of validates the infrastructure savings, the productivity gains, and then whatever that use case is, we're bringing it to market faster for you.
Thanks, Doug. Michael Adams has his hand up, so I'm going to allow him to ask a question. Here you go, Michael.
Sure.
Hi, Doug. Thank you so much for joining us today. I love the insights you shared.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah,
so the quick question, I, like you, love, technology disruptors and folks that are innovating, and which is why I'm on this call right now. I'm just very curious, want to learn more about Databricks. I was recently on a call with an executive from a top 20 technology company based on the nonprofit that I work with. And she was saying that this COVID time that we're in, she was in a conference call with 80 companies, and all these companies are starting to realize how far behind the wheel they are with their data science. And so in these last 2 quarters, have you seen more interest in your products from these enterprise and mid-market level companies? And how have those conversations been going?
So it's a great question. I think there's been a lot written about this subject. You can talk to McKinsey and others who have talked about kind of the need for organizations during COVID and during this difficult time to kind of evolve. And what I would tell you is the vast majority of organizations that we're talking to have accelerated their data initiatives. And it's no longer, they're kind of what they were thinking about doing in weeks and months, they now want to do in days and weeks. So that's, it translates to several things for us. Now, there are several industries that are just decimated too. So our overall business, incredibly healthy. I think there's been some articles even recently written. TechCrunch, I think, launched something just recently too, talking about the amazing growth rates at Databricks. I think we're so early in the journey for data and AI right now. What I would say is that our growth rates haven't suffered in COVID because many of these industries where data is a huge competitive differentiator, they've accelerated their initiatives, and those industries, even where they've been hurt by COVID. Even this last week, we had retailers signing 6-figure orders, and if you think about, the fact that we're headed now into the worst part of COVID and likely to be a number more lockdowns, at least I know there's some stuff happening in various states. It's really surprising that these folks are still investing. We even had a major airline recently just sign another significant contract with us because it's an absolutely critical way for them to drive improvements in terms of profits, efficiencies, and they can squeak out all sorts of benefits to the business. But without giving away, our growth rates, we've seen a very consistent flow of business pre and post COVID, or pre-COVID and during COVID, I guess, because we're not out of it yet.
Well, thank you so much, Doug. And I had one more question, more about the sales, because I'm early in my career and thinking about pivoting into potentially working for Databricks. When you're meeting with these high-level executives, what do you think you mentioned earlier, figuring out what their needs are and understanding their value proposition. How do you make sure that you're telling the story the right way to that executive and making sure that the person who's actually be using that product then tells the story that they need to say to that executive?
Yeah, no, great question. I think for our sales teams, it's really important that we do our research before we ever have those meetings. So I showed you an example with Intuit, right? Before we ever engaged with Intuit, we spent time researching where they are in their business, what the growth rates are like, what their strategic priorities are, what's the message they're delivering in the marketplace. Because then we want to be able to think about, well, how could Databricks help them? And what we do is we bring a point of view to that meeting. And that point of view is informed by, our own personal experience and a lot of the great training that we provide to our sales teams about Databricks and about various industries. But we also have some third-party data solutions where they've taken all of the use cases that we have inventoried, hundreds and hundreds of use cases by industry. And then they analyze the financials of the company like Intuit and find if they're strong in margin or not, or revenue growth, or SG&A expense might be too high. And it actually recommends use cases. So we bring a point of view that's very well informed, and it really facilitates the conversation. Now, depending, we generally probably don't have the executive meeting first. We probably have the data team meeting first, and then eventually get to the executive to validate that the projects we're working on would be important to them. But what I would say is that we bring that point of view even to the data teams, because we want to help them to make sure that whatever it is they say they're working on, that they understand how it's going to impact the business. Because our job as our sales teams really think about it is helping the data team, solve the world's toughest problems. But the only way to do that is getting the executives to agree and invest and fund that. So we try to make sure that the data teams who are got use cases, that they can plug into a strategic initiative or a strategic priority at the top level. And we do that at Intuit. There's a number of things that they're doing specifically that all the use cases that they're using Databricks for are fully aligned to the slides that I kind of quickly scanned through there in their Investor Day presentation.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah, some great questions and some great answers.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Doug, for sharing your thoughts and your experience with us. It's been a great presentation, so thank you so much. I also want to thank Databricks for hosting this lecture series. And our next webinar in the series is planned for January 21st. So everybody, please keep an eye out. I also want to say thanks to everyone for joining us today. We will have the recording of the presentation posted on the event page of the iSchool site in the next week or so. So yeah, thanks all. And thank you, Doug.
Thank you all. Thanks, Drew.
Of course. Take care, everybody.